Welcome to the Kerry Barrett Show, the go-to podcast for leaders. Are you a founder, executive, or part of a dynamic team? Then you're in the right place. I'm Kerry Barrett, your on-camera confidence, public speaking, and delivery coach. Each week, we dive into practical tips, insightful interviews, and engaging stories to help you communicate with confidence and lead with impact. Whether you're in the boardroom or on the physical or digital stage, this podcast will help you elevate your presence. Let's get started. I very rarely have a guest on the show. Usually it's a monologue or a soliloquy about something having to do with communications, whether it's public speaking or media training or skills and mindset. But today, because Laban Ditchburn, and that's who you're seeing on the screen right there, his title is the world's best courage coach. And a lot of my clients deal with mindset issues, confidence, and certainly courage. I thought this would be a prime opportunity to introduce my audience to you. So, Laban, it's great to have you with us. How are you?
Kerry, as they say here in Medellin, Colombia, muy bendecido, which for those who don't speak Spanish means I'm very blessed. So it's wonderful to be here with you today.
Oh my gosh. And I don't speak Spanish. So thank you. I took 8 years of French in high school and college, and I don't remember anything other than the curse words.
So les mots qui vont très bien ensemble.
Yeah, I only know the curse words. I think you said very good at some point in there, and that's all I know.
It's from the Beatles. It's from the Beatles song. It's I'll say the only words I know that you'll understand, which is hilarious.
Oh my gosh. Well, not me. Apparently, I don't fall under that umbrella. So I want to ask you a question, and feel free to jump into a little bit of your background here. And but most interestingly, is how you got this moniker, the world's best courage coach. How did that come about, and what exactly does it mean?
So one of my favorite questions to answer, and if you're listening or watching this, you either had probably one or two responses. One was, how dare he be called that? And the second one is like, hey, that's pretty interesting. I want to learn more. So whatever category you fit into, I'll happily share with you how this came about. Because this really was born out of the lockdowns of 2021 when my wife and I were still living in Melbourne, Australia. For those who don't know, Melbourne was one of the most lockdown cities in the world. And after a failed attempt at starting my own business in 2019, I used to work in recruitment. We're kind of forced into this period of 2020, and that's when I created the podcast. 2020 is when I wrote my first book. And I had an experience with a coach by the name of Steve Hardison. Now, you probably haven't heard of Steve Hardison, but he's a 65-year-old Mormon guy out of Mesa, Arizona, and he is known as the ultimate coach. And a number of people that knew him had been coached by him. And to give you an idea, if you want to hire him, he's $200,000 for 50 hours coaching. So wow. He's a reasonable chunk of change. He's not the most expensive coach that I've ever heard, but he was certainly up there in the highest that I'd ever heard. Yeah. And he was an enigma. Like, he used to coach people like Byron Katie and Iyanla Vanzant, who was Oprah Winfrey's coach, and and a number of people that have gone on to become billionaires and professional athletes and that kind of thing. But he never did interviews. He never had a book. He never had any information apart from one interview that was on YouTube. And if you want to experience what I experienced, just get on YouTube after this and put in TBO LIT NFL, the letters TBO LIT NFL. It stands for the best defensive linebacker in the NFL. And it's not about football per se, but it's a story about Deuce Latui, who was the first ever Tongan NFL professional footballer. And I'd heard about this guy, and I watched this video, Kerry, and it was 2 hours and 10 minutes long of DNA alteringly good content. It shifted my being. And for context, I used to be a former degenerate. If you imagine if you had Charlie Sheen and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, if they got together and IVF'd a baby, that would be me.
That would be you.
Right. So I'm 8 years sober in August, longer for drugs, longer for gambling, longer for a number of other challenges that I had. So I watched this video and I was so moved by this guy, Steve Hardison, that I wanted to speak to him. And for those who don't know anything about me, which will be most of you, I'm become somewhat well known for my outrageous cold calls in getting on very famous people onto my podcast, even though I don't have an audience, right?
Yeah.
Or a very big audience. And so I got this guy's phone number and I rang him up. And I was back in Australia at this time. And Steve picks up the phone. He says, "Hey, this is Steve." And I said, "Steve Hardison?" He said, "Yes, it is." I said, "Steve Hardison, it's Laban Ditchburn from Melbourne, Australia." He goes, "Laban, so great to hear from you. I've been waiting for this call all my life." And I've never spoken to this guy before. Now,
I love
bear in
it.
mind, yeah, me too, right? Like, who answers the phone like that?
I'm going
you
to
can
start answering
incorporate.
the phone. I'm going to answer the phone like that every time from now on.
I would love
Love
to
it.
hear the response from you or anyone that implements that because it's so powerful. But he had turned down being on the Oprah Winfrey Show 4 times. Like, this is how much of an enigma this guy wanted to be. And so I rang him up. He picks up the phone. He says this amazing thing. And I said, "Steve, I just watched this video and it moved me. And I just wanted to ask you one very specific question. Because my philosophy in life is, what value can I add this person's life? It doesn't matter whether they are well-known, famous, or the cleaner, down the road here at Medellin. It doesn't matter. It's just, it's been a great practice and it served me very well in the last 4 or 5 years." And he said, and I said, "What do you need help with, Steve?" He said, "Wow, Laban, I want to acknowledge you for asking me that question." He goes, "You know what? I'm 8% body fat, 64 years old. I do 10 miles a day. I got the love of a beautiful woman. I got all the money in the world kind of thing. And, but I just want to thank you for asking me that question." And I said, "Oh, Steve, you're so welcome." I said, "Hey, are you still not doing podcast interviews and media?" He goes, "That's right." And I said, "No worries." I said, "Reason I ask is I'm a writer and a speaker and a coach, and I'm well on my way to being known as the most positively influential speaker in the world. But someone actually I was talking to recently said that there's a lot of ego in that statement." Steve Hardison, this devout Mormon, yells down the phone at me. He goes, "Laban, you tell that person to," and he used the full word. He goes, "Do you know who I am?" And I go, "Who are you, Steve?" All evangelical. He goes, "I'm the best coach in the world." And Kerry, the way he delivered that statement had absolutely zero ego about it. And I was like, what is this? And I had a 15-minute phone call with Steve Hardison that absolutely changed my life. I got off that call and I called a guy, Chris Doris, who had been coached by Steve Hardison.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Doris is a mental toughness coach.
Mm-hmm.
He used to work with PGA golfers and pro footballers. He does a lot of stuff with Salesforce and these big blue chips now.
Yeah.
And at the time, my wife had to fly to Russia, which is where she's from, for some urgent family business. And I was left in Australia because we weren't married then. I couldn't go with her. And they had all the mandates and stuff as well.
Yeah.
I said, "Chris," and I was destitute, Kerry, absolutely broke.
God.
I'd been locked in our homes and I wasn't able to earn anything. I was a new entrepreneur. And I said, "Chris, I spoke to Steve Hardison." He goes, "What do you mean?" And I go, "I just had a 15-minute chat with Steve Hardison." He goes, "What are you talking about?" And I go, "I was just talking to Steve Hardison." He goes, "Do you have any idea the gift of courage you had to bring to the world?" And in that moment, the world's best courage coach declaration was created. A declaration to how I choose to show up in the world. Nothing to do with my ego.
Yeah.
And I said to Chris, "I need some help, man. I need to create some money." And he worked with me for 4 hours, and he normally charges about $3,000 an hour, to give you an idea, for free, and helped me formulate this world's best courage coach. And we were going to implement what I do with my outrageous cold calls, to cold call the CEOs of the biggest companies on planet Earth to deliver this declaration. And so I called Eric Yang, who's the CEO for Zoom, and the line was a bit broken and we couldn't really, his English isn't that great either. And I called someone from Cisco and these other big, Walmart, and I couldn't get through, and it was getting late in the US. And I called this company in Australia called Hodges Real Estate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Hodges Real Estate isn't the biggest company in the world, but it's the oldest real estate company in Australia. And the CEO is a gentleman by the name of Tony Zaka.
Mm-hmm.
And I got his cell phone number from some software that I got on LinkedIn, which I can talk about at the end. And he picks up the phone and he says, "Hi, Tony speaking." And I said, "Tony Zaka?" He said, "Yes, it is." I said, "Tony Zaka, it's Laban Ditchburn from Melbourne." He goes, "Oh, hi, Laban. Do we know each other?" I said, "Tony, we've never spoken, but today's your lucky day." He laughed. He laughs. He goes, "Why is it my lucky day, Laban?" I said, "Because, Tony, I'm the world's best courage coach, and I teach your people how to take bold, massive, and courageous action so that they can facilitate their own miraculous outcomes. Now, I swear to God this happened, Kerry. 15 minutes with Tony Zaka. He invited me back the following Wednesday for a virtual Zoom call because we're still in lockdown in Melbourne at this point, to present for training and coaching for some business. And I had nothing more than this outrageous cold call. And so I jump on this call the following week, and something that Steve Hardison shared stuck with me. He said, the power is in the listener. And I was like, I'm just going to shut up. I'm going to ask one open question. I'm just going to shut up and listen. And I asked him what he wanted to do with the business. And he spoke for about 45 minutes. And I just shut up. And when he finished, I said, Tony, what about being the best real estate company in the state of Victoria, down 5 million people? He looked up at me and he goes, started sort of nodding subconsciously. And I said, well, what about being the best real estate company in Australia? Now he's really getting into it, right? He's seeing possibility for the first time. He's not playing as small as he was. 30 seconds later, Kerry, I had the CEO of this company that I've just started speaking to the first time, yelling at the top of his lungs, I'm the best real estate CEO in the world. and
Did you
context?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was $100 an hour Australian as a coach back then, which is about 60 USD. I pitched 250,000 Australian dollars, about 180,000 US, for a 3-month coaching program to the CEO, based on what they needed help with. It was a lot of work. Wow. He didn't laugh at me. He didn't hang up on me. He didn't dismiss me or anything else. He looked back at me. He said, Laban, he said, I physically do not have the liquid for that right now, but let me see what I can do. And in that moment, Kerry, the glass ceiling of limiting beliefs in my own head about who I am, who I can serve, and how I show up in the world was absolutely obliterated. And it completely shifted my being and has spilled forth into these outrageous scenarios that I've got myself into as a direct result of that one particular call. And I wish that there was a part of the story that was like, yeah, and he signed the check. Like, we never did any work together, but Tony did his bit for me. That experience was far more valuable than if I'd gotten the money, that would have normalized it and I wouldn't have played any bigger. Yeah. So now I get to pitch like multi-million-dollar pieces of work for different companies and all outrageous kind of stuff now. And so anyway, this is the story about how the world's best courage coach came about.
I love that. And I want to ask you a question because you bring up an element that I hadn't necessarily planned on asking you about, but I see some of my own struggles and certainly like the small business owners that I work with, some of their struggles in the story that you just related, which is I'm playing small. And whether it's I have trouble asking for my value, or I am afraid for some reason, or I don't fully recognize it. When you threw out that number, right, regardless of the fact that you might have been destitute and maybe you didn't even feel necessarily internally that it was, he was going to bite. Like what in that moment changed for you where you felt okay, not just I'm going to force myself to do it because it's a practice or an exercise in courage. Like what was that? How did that shift happen? Because I undervalue myself all the friggin' time when I pitch myself to clients. And if they can't afford me, even at that rate, I'll drop my prices further because I have a crappy mindset with money.
Two things, Kerry, and I'm really grateful you asked that because you're asking a question that everyone thinks about, myself included. I made a conscious effort after reading a couple of different books, and I'm like you, I've read lots of books in the last 6 years. I've read 700 something books, but it was a book around negative self-talk, and that's been the theme across a number of books. But I've deliberately removed as much negative self-talk, so you'll never hear me speak poorly of myself without context. Okay. Because the power of our language. My wife is a hypnotherapist, and she spends her days undoing the 95% of the subconscious sabotage stuff that goes on in people.
And it's so automatic. We don't even, it's so baked into so many of us. It's like we don't even necessarily recognize it until we get intentional about listening to it. You know, even as simple as like taking a win and dismissing it as a fluke without even recognizing it. That is self-sabotage. That is negative head trash, even if you're not consciously doing it. So interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like I'm fascinated.
No, it's fine. It's fine because, like, I'll give you an example of something that's worked very well. I interviewed, a lot of you would have heard of Jack Canfield, who co-wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul and Success Principles, right? He shared with me on an interview that he had a swear jar at home, and instead of putting money in for profanity, they put money in for negative self-talk. So I implemented that into the mastermind that I run. If anyone uses negative self-talk, it's a $10 fine that goes into a kitty towards a charity. And as a result, even very wealthy people don't want to spend money on negative self-talk. So this is the first thing I would say. The second thing is, no matter how broken, destitute that I was, I still had my boundaries. I knew the amount of work it was going to take to get this company and the people to where he wanted to go was going to take that kind of money. And you might think, oh, Laban, what are you creating numbers? Like I did the calculations in my head with the time and the effort. So the significance around what we charge, and don't get me wrong, folks, I've been guilty of this too, but what we charge is inextricably linked to our levels of self-worth. And as soon as you hear that for the first time, you're like, oh, does that mean I don't think very highly of myself? And that can come from conditioning from when we're kids and all kinds of stuff, but you can change it. Clients get better and easier the more we charge, and you can focus more efforts on the outcome faster when you've got less administrative tasks to muck around with. So, you know, once you realize that, at least you can do something about it. I'm not here to judge you. Why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah. Energetically, it's so different as well. I mean, I was on, not to belabor the point, but connecting the dots, at least in my own mind, with what you're saying and some recent experiences. I was on one call yesterday where it was not the right, a discovery call that couldn't work with me due to price point. And I considered for a second dropping my program rates. And then I had somebody else who I couldn't even finish the pitch, and she was like, I'm in, do whatever the price is, just tell me what it is and send me the invoice. And that, while not as dramatic as your experience that you relayed, created a similar, I don't know if it's like a feedback loop or whatever, but I recognized, okay, when the right people are there, and that's a big part of it as well, getting yourself in front of the right people, but the change does begin to happen, but it starts internally for so many of us.
I mean, to that, Kerry.
Go ahead.
Well, the only thing I'd add to that as well is that once you receive payment for an invoice, once you increase your prices significantly, for me at least, I level up in terms of how I am going to create an outcome for this person. And I've become, so it improves me, and then the people at the top. And when I say the top, I'm talking about high integrity people. So I have a list of musts for clients, and it's about 10 bullet points. And if they don't fall within that parameter, I can walk away. So that frees up a lot of time as well. So if I send them the list and say, what do you think of this? They're like, oh my God, this is me. Or they're like, oh yeah, I'm 7 out of 10 things. It's always a no.
Yeah.
So, and it helps qualify them in or out. And people at the top, again, a lot of people have all the financial resources but need your skills. How many people are teaching what you teach, Kerry, that have an Emmy? Like 10?
Yeah.
5? I don't know. Like probably you. I don't know. Like, and it's not that you're putting all the gravitas on that, but that's indicative of the kind of person, the discipline that you've had in your life. And I've really enjoyed learning your story and researching for this, because even though I'm a guest, I want to know about you, and I understand you've overcome major personal challenges and all this incredible stuff. That is valuable to people that need to pay, otherwise they will not pay the attention.
Yeah. And
even when you charge 10 grand for something, there's a certain level of people, because of their net worth, won't pay the amount of attention that they need to if they're going to pay $100,000.
Yeah.
And with all the financial resources coming in, then you can free up your time to give more pro bono stuff to the people that don't have the resources. They can read our books. They can jump on and listen to our podcast. They can you know, whatever else it is for free. That's what
Content,
I
yeah,
had to do.
absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? So it's
Yep.
not like, because I bet you're like me in many ways, a massive empath and feel for people, and that's why you want to become a vet partially, because you've
Yeah.
got a soft touch. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So just my 2 cents, but
Yeah. You did do your research. Well, and it's interesting too. And I'm going to bring this up because you and I talked a little bit about it before the show went live, and you read some of my story about experiencing multiple miscarriages when I was, specifically, we were trying for our second and our third. And you and your wife also experienced far more than I did, but we talked about how those, while we might not recognize courage in the business sense and in the personal sense as having being very intimately connected, they are. And you describe your wife as one of the most courageous people that you know as well. Like, if you're comfortable, I'd love to dive into that a little bit more.
oh, I love sharing this because, behind every great man's an even greater woman in many cases. And
Not mine.
he's an Air Force, isn't he a jet fighter? That's some of my favorite. So for context, my wife and I have just experienced our 20th consecutive miscarriage, right?
Sorry.
And no, please, it's fine. Like we talk about this stuff publicly a lot because we've seen the power of sharing this. So my wife is from Russia originally, and I'm going to share something pretty heavy. So if you've got kids in the room, maybe just block their ears for a second. But she grew up in a place called Sakhalin Island, which is just north of Japan, and she's quarter Japanese and 3/4 Russian. She's stunningly beautiful.
I've seen her Instagram. She is.
Right. And unfortunately, she, from the age of 15 till she was 21, experienced systemic childhood sexual abuse from a stepfather. And there was 2 pregnancies from the abuse and 2 illegal abortions with no aftercare, one of which damaged her uterine wall. And we understand that the cause of all the miscarriages and the ectopic pregnancies has been the result of the damage to that. So she told me this a year into our relationship, and her and I have been together 6 years in September, to give you an idea, right? We've been married for about 2 years. Okay. And that was off the back of me at the very beginning of our relationship, because of my hedonistic past. I said, Anna, I've lived a life, and I want you to feel comfortable asking anything you want about my history, as long as you're happy to hear the answer. And boy, howdy, Kerry, did she take advantage of that opportunity. and I was forced to reveal some parts of me that I thought were going to be kept prisoner for the rest of my life. Yeah. Thankfully, and I was able to share them, and there was no judgment, and she accepted me for who I was and the foibles that I had. And a year later, she opened up and told me about this. So she started her healing journey at that point. I said, darling, you got to heal from this. And she tried everything, and this is where hypnotherapy came into it. But as a result, that trip back to Russia that Anna had, that I mentioned earlier, was to go and testify against this guy when she told her mum about it. So she went through polygraph examinations, physical, gynecological examinations, and they ended up dismissing the case. But because there wasn't enough evidence. It was such a long time ago, because she's 36 now, right? But what she did do, she used the power of the media, and she approached 3 different major newspapers there, and one of them took her story. And in Russia, they don't really publish stuff like this, and there's not much support for this kind of thing for women, where she is, more so in Moscow and the other side of the country.
Sure.
And that story won the Pulitzer Prize equivalent for how viral it went and how impactful. And Anna shared her story unabashed, put her email address in there, and to this day, so this is in 2021, she's still getting emails from women that are saying, thank you for sharing this. Thank you for helping me feel normal. And she's forgiven her stepfather. She's forgiven her mother, who didn't know but wasn't there to protect. She forgave her biological father for not protecting her. So you talk about courage, like courage to forgive at that scale. Like anytime I get angry at my family or whatever, like I just think about what Anna's gone through and what she's overcome, and I'm like humbled. She is the most courageous person I've ever met. So that's the context, and she's given me her permission to share this story publicly. So, please don't think I'm airing dirty laundry.
No, and in fact, it gave me chills, because the forgiveness element is really sort of the final go on that story, because that is an incredibly vulnerable place to be in. Like, if you don't harbor that anger, if you don't hold on to it, you can feel like you've opened yourself up to being mistreated or abused again in some way. Your guard's down because you've forgiven. Like that in and of itself is a huge testament to courage and power and extraordinary living and being present. I mean, all of it. It's just, I didn't know that element of her story, and I appreciate you sharing it with us, because that is powerful stuff.
Oh, and my pleasure. I mean, well, I have a friend back in Australia who had one miscarriage, and his wife went into a depression for 18 months.
Yeah.
If she had known and had access to these kind of stories, how maybe would she have handled that? How
Yeah.
would she have been able to thrive rather than suffer? So this is the power of storytelling, and what you do is why it's so important about becoming a really confident storyteller, because
Yeah.
people don't remember what you say, what you do, necessarily remember how you make them feel, right?
Yeah.
And so learning to tell your stories from a position of power, not from victimhood, is
Sure.
the ultimate comeback story.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want your audience to feel like a therapist. You
No,
want them
please don't.
Yeah, you want them to come away with a strong, empowering message. And that ability to tell a story or share something emotional as it relates to your audience's struggles, that is applicable whether you are talking to somebody who owns a micro business, or you are talking to a CEO of a multinational, billion-dollar annual revenue sort of company. Like, the storytelling component is applicable across all industries, across all walks of life, across all levels of income, socioeconomic status, however it is when you look at it. I feel like oftentimes in the corporate world, there are assumptions made that storytelling isn't quite as important. We just want the data and the statistics. And really, at the end of the day, whether you're teaching, whether you're selling, whether you are creating content, whatever it is, that's the stuff that's what holds it all together. And it is interesting you mentioned, and I don't want to go back and forth too much, but you mentioned a little bit when you were sharing the story of your wife, how you sort of opened yourself up and said, you can ask me anything about my past. And I think you described it as hedonistic. And when I was doing my research on you mentioned in that research, or that I read, you overcame a dysfunctional childhood. Your parents had an awful divorce. And I want to just underscore that sometimes when we're adulting, we feel like the things that happened to us when we were younger they shouldn't be relevant, or they shouldn't affect us in the way that they still do. I was bullied, and my parents also had a horrible divorce, not until I was 37, but that's a whole nother story. But my point is, it still affects me. And while I used to sort of shirk from that and think it was a weakness, and sometimes, to be honest with you, when I'm in a bad place, I still do consider it that way. But I have recognized that from me to, the person you mentioned, like the guys picking up the garbage on the street, to a CEO of a multinational organization, we all are influenced or informed, whether we're conscious of it or not, by that sort of stuff. And it directly plays into the way that we either manufacture courage or are able to develop it authentically as we grow.
Do you know what, Kerry? I received a compliment the other day from a former, he's still a pilot actually, gentleman by the name of Captain Charlie Plum. And I just share this because it's relevant, because I know your husband was a pilot as well in the Air Force. He was a guest on my podcast about 3 years ago, and Captain Charlie Plum was shot down over Hanoi on his last mission in the Vietnam War. And he was captured by the Viet Cong and held prisoner for 6.5 years. And it was in the Hanoi Hilton, they called it, which was the same division as where Senator John McCain was based, just to give people some context. For 4.5 years, this guy was kept in an 8-foot by 8-foot cell with no light. And they were forbidden from talking. And if you want to learn more about his story, just get on YouTube and watch an interview with him. Incredible. And he's a professional speaker, goes around the world. He's 82 now. And he was asking me, how are things going and how's Anna? And I shared, what I shared with you guys about these miscarriages, because it's been a big part of our life. We've been on the road for 2.5 years and been going through these experiences in foreign countries where we don't speak the language, ending up in emergency rooms and that kind of thing. And, we take full responsibility for that. But he said, Laban, you are one of the most courageous people I've ever met and resilient people I've ever met. And I was like, this guy is a prisoner of war. Like, either being a POW is not as tough as I think it is, or like maybe there's something in this. And I'm not sharing this to stroke my ego. Like, what I want people to understand is that, like, whatever you've gone through, whatever your major trauma, whatever adversity, like, find a way to overcome it and then use it as your new fuel source and your superpower, because it makes us so relatable. If I get on here and superficial, and I know, from coming from the media as well, like the news, typically very superficial level stuff in terms of getting to know the hosts and the presenters, the fact that you share this information about the miscarriages automatically endeared me even more to you and made me care even more about creating a better experience for the audience today. Not that I was coming in half-assed, but like, you can see the power of it. The biggest issue I have now, if you can call it that, is my memory, which is very good, needs to get even better to remember everyone, because I'm becoming so bloody memorable because of the storytelling. They're like, oh, Laban, like, and someone that's just, shared something superficial. So it's kind of their fault. So become more memorable by owning your stuff, using it as your new superpower, and telling stories. Yeah, there's my point.
There you go. I love it. And you're 100% right. And, I want to ask, sort of switch gears here now, because unfortunately we're coming up on time, although we've gone a little bit over, because your stories are very good. You mentioned when we first started this conversation that your cold call to Steve, and I'm guessing that the skill that it took to, first of all, you should write a book on how you do that. That's my first suggestion. I just bought a book actually that dives into exactly how to create memorable cold calls that people will pick up, and how to get into the ear of CEOs at big organizations. So I would read your book, number one.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea, by the way.
Number two, and that book is a bestseller. It's been around a while, so we're due for some new information as far as like getting into the ears of big names. The second thing is you have a program. Again, I'm guessing that the skills probably align and you draw from one to create the other. Your Podcast Heroes program, which is how you help. It's one of the ways you help clients to create a podcast where you have these A-lister guests that they may have, no experience with getting in front of, or may not even have a large audience, but you understand how to bring them in and then use that interview to create a memorable experience for the audience. And a lot of my clients and people that I speak with who maybe aren't clients but are interested in creating visibility or sales opportunities or lead gen, or even just having a platform where they can invite somebody to share their own story as a way for visibility and growth. They're curious about how they do this as well. And I would love to know a little bit about what Podcast Heroes is, and if there are any sort of takeaways that people can begin to at least sort of rattle around as they ponder putting a podcast in place for themselves, and how to bring in great guests and create memorable experiences for their own audiences.
Well, I'm into that, Kerry. And the reason I created this, I got some great advice from people who are very, very successful in the marketing space. And they're like, Laban, like, we have never met anyone better than you at reaching out and connecting with these A-list guests. And it's A-list in whatever niche you're in, by the way. It's not, they don't have to be famous. For me, the podcast is called Become Your Own Superhero. So I want to interview brilliant speakers that have a story that will inspire and motivate and empower people to take action for themselves. Mm-hmm. And like 8 episodes on, I got Les Brown, the motivational speaker.
Yeah, I know that name. Yeah.
Right. He ended up giving me the blueprint for my book, Bet on You, and then wrote the foreword for it for free. And I didn't ask him. And like, there's 220 episodes I've done over the last 4 years, and I've generated, and I worked this out when I created the course, over 1 million, it's 1,000,001 now, in free stuff from podcast guests and the introductions that they've made to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff, and a lot of it's priceless as well. Introductions, like endorsements from just the most incredible people. And I'm not a famous person yet.
Yeah.
I'm not a super well-known person. I've experienced a lot of censorship on my YouTube channel because of the people I've interviewed. And so I teach anyone that has a platform, whether it be a podcast or a YouTube or a Rumble, whatever it is, that wants to use the power of borrowed ethos by reaching out and connecting with the people that they want in their ether, to not only create a wonderful experience for the guest and make it memorable, but also to naturally develop know, like, and trust with these people. And as a result, they will invite you into their circle. And when you combine it with the what value can I add this person's life and some basic fundamental skill shifts, the magic happens. And so, like, I can share some more stuff, but like for the interest of time, I created a little 5-video training. It's at podcastingheroes.com. And you can go there and you can do it in your own leisure, but it'll give you an insight into how to start exactly what I'm talking about. And it's especially targeted at people if you don't have a big audience. And it's only things that I've done. I don't teach anything that I haven't done. So I have to lead by example, and I have to operate in integrity. And you don't have to, I've never paid a guest to come on. I've never paid to be a guest, and I've been invited on some big shows, you know. This one included, Kerry. So, you know, like, it's just, it's been a life-changing. It afforded me the ability to fund the 2.5-year travel that we've had around the world, and Mexico and India and the United States and now Colombia, when I never came from an entrepreneurial background prior to that. So it's just been ridiculous.
I love that. And I will put, for those of you who are listening to this podcast, the link to Podcasting Heroes will be in the show notes. And if you're watching this live, I'll put that up in the comments as well. I would definitely check it out. Do you find that I'm glad that you mentioned when you say A-list guest, what that means, because it doesn't necessarily mean it is a huge household name, but it's the right person for your audience. It's their message and the credibility and the authority and traction that they've gained in that particular niche, whatever it is, whether it's professional development or speaking or media or courage, podcasting, et cetera, et cetera. That's a very important distinction. I do think sometimes when people are thinking about putting together content or a podcast, that's one of the biggest challenges. How will I make it interesting? And it often gets sidelined for just almost a rat-a-tat-tat of data and statistics and that sort of stuff, which, if you're listening and you don't have a podcast, podcasting, when it's done well, is conversational, and it's story building, and it's most of all creating a memory or an experience for your audience. Would you agree? Yeah.
It is by far and away the most powerful modality to get to where you want to go I've ever heard of. And you can do it basically for free, give or take. And one other example that I just thought of as well.
Yeah.
I have used the skills that I developed in cold calling to access people that in the medical field that are unattainable to help Anna and I with these pregnancy issues, right? I've used it to connect other people together that I know need help. And like it's you don't even need a podcast to benefit. Like this is a skill that they should teach at schools, but they would never will. And I can't explain to you the ridiculous people that I've spoken to. It's just been amazing. So, and it's put me in the room with so many of these incredible people who I love to learn from. And just one other thing real quick, like, you know, if you want to make a podcast interesting, bring on people that you're interested in, not what you think other people are. You know, I had a huge fight with my father in 2020, and then I wrote a blog about it because I disowned him at the time. And then a friend of mine posted about Dr. Fred Luskin, who founded the Stanford Forgiveness Project that would help reunite Auschwitz camp survivors with camp commanders and IRA bomb blast victims. And then by me bringing him on and researching him, I learned how to forgive my father and then forgive myself, more importantly. And so any issues I have in my life, I just bring on an expert to help solve that challenge.
I love it. No, it's a great way to get your questions answered. And even more so than that, I know you say it's sort of tongue in cheek, but the skills that you're talking about developing, like anybody who's listening to this, and it's mostly a business audience, but it is applicable to not just your business, but your life. You're talking about really at the end of the day, good communication skills, mental health, emotional strength, but it's about the way that you communicate that as well, and the way you show that to the world or to your dad in this particular case. And so the lessons, much like confidence or courage, are applicable broadly across your life. I don't want anybody to think that we're talking about something that's just about personal or just about business. These are skills that are life skills.
Yeah, this is really like I will definitely be homeschooling my kids, and this will be a huge part of their learning when they eventually come. So yeah, I encourage you to do the same.
I probably actually need to listen to that episode of your podcast based on my relationship with my own father. So thank you for that.
I'll send you the link afterwards.
Yeah, I wish we had more time. Please do, by the way. If people are interested in learning a little bit more about what you do, your story, how they might be able to work with you, again, I'll put the links to your Podcasting Heroes program up in the show notes and the comments. But are there other platforms, et cetera, they should check out? How should they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I have an OnlyFans account, which is no, I'm kidding.
I just sort of nodded and I was waiting to see where that went. Is it of your feet? Because I have that one too.
No matter how destitute things got in my life, Kerry, my wife and I never resorted to OnlyFans. No judging to anyone else out there, but
as far as we know.
Look, honestly, my wife's just done my website. So you just go to labanditchburn.com and it's got all the links to my book, the podcast, the links to anything you want. Or if you're just feeling extra adventurous, just punch Laban Ditchburn into your favorite browser and have a look at the first thing that comes up. And if it's not a subpoena for a criminal investigation, then you're probably good.
Okay, that's good to know. Are there those out there too? That's another Laban Ditchburn.
I don't think so.
It was so great to chat with you. I really appreciate you guesting on this program. As I mentioned at the outset, I very rarely have guests. And when I learned about who you were and what you do and the things you talk about, it was a no-brainer. And this show has solidified my decision. Like, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Well, my absolute pleasure. I want to say something real quick to the audience, whoever's watching or listening, if that's okay. So first thing, shout out to Matt Drinkan for the introduction to Kerry.
Oh, yep.
You're a superstar. However, if this is the first episode that you've listened to, or the 41st, I don't know how many episodes you've done, Kerry, and you haven't, and you're benefiting from this in some way, shape, or form, whatever platform you're on, I want you to go there straight away and leave a review, and then share an episode or two with someone you really care about that they may benefit from, because with Kerry, the work that Kerry is doing is world class, and it's very, very hard work. The amount of work involved is just mind-blowing rather. So go and leave a review, good, bad, or indifferent. It all helps get organic traffic, and let's blow this channel up.
You are actually the best. Thank you so much, Laban. And to my audience, thank you for joining us. We will see you back here next week. Same time, same place. Until then, take it easy.